Greetings and thank you for joining us today for this webinar brought to you by Impact Your Pathway, where we'll be talking about how to measure future-ready skills using student-centered voice, specifically in relation to the Golden State Pathways program in California and meeting all 4 program requirements now that the grant is fully funded and in action, particularly supporting the continued development of a skilled and educated workforce. And so we're Impact Your Pathway, and we actually measure and quantify skills like curiosity, perspective taking, purpose, self-control, great growth mindset, compassion, and gratitude, all skills and competencies that are mapped and related to CASEL and requisite for the 21st century workforce in terms of preparing students for high-skilled, high-wage jobs of the future. And before we go any further and talk about some of the compliance factors and mandates of the Golden State Pathways program, it's probably important to get a little bit of an understanding of how we can quantify character and how we can provide data back to schools, districts, students, and stakeholders in regards to the growth and development of a student's soft skills. So here's a quick demonstration of how it works.
In today's schools and classrooms, educators choose Impact Your Pathway to elevate student voice and nurture untapped potential. Using the latest in machine learning, teachers get rich data insights to help pinpoint subgroups where support is needed most.
And I don't want to be the type of person that's always just above, like, the below line. You know what I mean?
The AI-powered platform seamlessly integrates with existing systems, providing real-time growth scoring across 8 essential attributes.
Something I would like to improve on the most is probably grit.
Orchestrate everything from pre- and post-assessments to daily practice activities with a custom curated slate of content designed for today's YouTube generation. From curiosity to compassion, Impactor tracks it all, empowering educators to make data-driven decisions that enhance outcomes and transform lives. With easy-to-use dashboards and automated feedback, teachers can focus on amplifying student strengths and developing their full potential. Because every child has a story, and every teacher wants to listen.
Definitely, I think I'd like for my purpose to be something I'm passionate about, and I think it's something I need to seek out instead of waiting for it to come to me.
Impact Your Pathway, elevating student voice, transforming student minds.
So there's really a lot to talk about in regards to what exactly students who are soon to be in the workforce in the 21st century need to be successful, from hard skills to soft skills to the non-cognitive attributes that we all value, and kind of reframing the work that schools and districts have done throughout California to get to this point. It's really important to understand what exactly Golden State Pathways is, how it came to be, and what are the accountability and compliance metrics and standards that are behind this effort to ensure a more skilled and diverse workforce as jobs are training, particularly in the age of AI. And so I think a good place to start is really with how we got here. Golden State Pathways was a grant program that actually became California Ed Code law in 2022, and we'll revisit that law shortly. Those of you who were involved in the development, planning, and application process for this grant went ahead and actually filled out all of these appendices, read all of these rules, thinking about Appendix E, which is really the Golden State Pathways grant application narrative. I'm thinking about Appendix B, which we all had trainings and webinars on in regards to the program requirements and legislation. And you know, one of the things we think about at Impact Your Pathway is just as adults ourselves, we're in the 21st century workforce. And just to complete the Golden State Pathways application process, we needed curiosity and perspective taking, garnering the insights and support of others to understand all stakeholders' needs. We needed purpose to develop our specific program goals, and grit and growth mindset to actually execute this law and application process, which actually was quite arduous, right? Getting funding notifications that are supposed to come out in the spring of 2024 and then get delayed to the summer of 2024 and then recalibrated again in October of 2024. So there's really a lot that we had to do in terms of embodying and executing the same skills that Impact Your Pathway is growing, developing, and measuring for our students. With that, I think an important place to go is the Appendix E, right, which was actually our grant narrative application. And if you remember, part of the application process was to come up with a work plan for expected outcome 4, which was integrated support services. And so the question that districts had to answer was, how will your GSPP provide or expand integrated support services necessary to address a pupil's social, emotional, and academic learning needs, including underrepresented student populations? And full disclosure, we got some feedback and data from the state of California. This particular outcome is part of the delay in reading and assigning awardees in the application process throughout the spring and the summer. This was a challenge for districts to come up with a work plan, in particular because of that word, integrated support. And so what a lot of districts did in their initial plans was write about how to expand counseling services or MTSS services that were already in existence to kind of envelop all students and bucket CTE programs and learners into that work plan. But actually what the state of California is looking for is a CTE specific integrated support plan that comes with data. That's part of what disaggregating all of the results for underrepresented student populations is about, right? The state of California wants to specifically understand what schools and districts are doing to measure the support they're providing to unduplicated student populations. And that's part of why Impact Your Pathway has become a solution that districts have trusted and valued, is because we are going to be able to provide disaggregated data by student subgroup in relation to a number of CASEL competencies and what we call impact or anchor attribute competencies that are directly related to the workforce, and this idea of SEL 2.0, right, which is all of those CASEL competencies from self and social awareness to responsible decision-making, but applied for the workforce, where it looks like goals or purpose or gratitude or empathy. So this particular part, outcome 4, it is part of the genesis for solutions like Impact Your Pathway to become so helpful and useful in meeting all of your compliance standards. I also want to draw your attention to Appendix B of GSPP. And this is actually what the law says. So as you know, the way that Golden State Pathways came about is it's different than most grants in that it's not just a grant, it's actually ed code. And so the grant is to fund districts in being able to execute the ed code. And Section 53023 of the code says, contingent upon appropriation by the legislature and the Annual Budget Act, the department shall administer the Golden State Pathways program as a competitive grant program. In order to be eligible to receive a grant, here's what you need to do. And Section A is commit to providing participating pupils with all of the following. And then again, we see that component number 4, integrated support services necessary to address a pupil's social, emotional, and academic needs. But more importantly, there's a data and accountability piece to this as well. And so if you look at 53024 as a condition of receiving Golden State Pathways program, and again, this is ed code, not just written into the grant itself, but written into California law, a grant recipient shall annually collect and submit data disaggregated by pupil subgroup on outcome measures to the department, which shall include but are not limited to the quality indicators described in the California State Plan for Career Technical Education. So the question becomes for school districts, how are you measuring by pupil subgroup inside of CTE programming the soft skill, hard skill, competency development of all of your learners, in particular in relation to the California State Plan for Career and Technical Education? And so it's not just about curriculum and programming anymore. It's not just about having, SEL worksheets for lack of a better term, or SEL programs that teach students the definition of particular competencies. It's about an integrated CTE specific work plan that provides disaggregated data that you will need to submit annually to your county office of education and or to your CDE liaison at the state, or we may face, sanctions or accountability metrics, or in some cases, obviously, if you don't execute on the grant, you'll have to give those grant monies back and fold those programs. And so we definitely don't want that. And an impactor pathway is really here to help and support and give you the data that you need for those reporting purposes. Again, to be clear, 53023 and 53024 are law. And so if you haven't, bookmarked your California legislation website, by all means, I recommend that you do that. And here you can see the law written in kind. So Section 4, again, is to integrate support services necessary to address the people's social, emotional, and academic needs within CTE. And then, of course, provide that data by disaggregated subgroup back to your county office of ed or to CDE at the state level. Hopefully, just kind of depending on your role within CTE or your district office, you may or may not know about the Career Technical Education State Plan. This is a plan that really preceded Golden State Pathways, and this is part of the articulation of CTE, kind of 1.0, back in 2012 up till now. We're part of what community colleges wanted to do, are still wanting to do, and is really the mandate and goal of CTE are these 4 components, but in particular creating expanding competency-based education and also embracing online instruction as well as experiential and work-based learning. And so that notion of a competency-based education, this is about skills. So this is no longer about mastery of a particular content strand like we do in ELA or math or life science or physical science, but actually competency-based education. So skills that employers are ready and willing to hire for, not just in regards to apprenticeships and training, but also soft skills. How collaborative, how communicative, how empathetic, how understanding the workforce is, particularly as workforce conditions are changing. People have hybrid jobs now in a way that didn't exist in the 20th century, and we're using agentic AI in a way going forward that we never did before. And so what are the new set of human skills that are going to be requisite for students to be successful in the workforce? And then how are high schools, community colleges, CTE pathway programs not only teaching and developing those skills, but tracking and measuring them as well? And so again, we're fortunate that Impactor Pathway can really help to do exactly that. And so to kind of bring you to the antecedent of where all of this research comes from and what it is that Impactor Pathway can do to help you disaggregate that data and to help you actually track, measure, and grow and quantify skills like curiosity, we really need to start with what the research is. And so what you're looking at is something that we call the Impactor cycle. These 8 competencies don't come from Impactor Pathway on their own. They literally come from Harvard University and the Making Caring Common project, which we'll get into in a moment. And these exist in a cycle. And so the argument being made academically is that the cycle begins with curiosity in quad 1 and moves to perspective taking and goes clockwise across the wheel. And so in order to develop a goal, you first need to be curious and understand what kind of goals there could be, and you need to ask questions about what it is that you want to do and why it is you want to do that. As you begin to think about and answer those questions. You'll need perspective taking along the way in order to understand how your goal may impact yourself or loved ones, family, or community. And once you identify a goal, you're beginning to have your purpose. And so the impactor cycle is about executing a particular goal using all 8 of these non-cognitive skills. So moving into quad 2 and purpose, once identified, now begins the process of executing your goal. So you'll need self-control, grit and growth mindset, passion and perseverance along the way, because it won't be easy. And once you get towards the end of that cycle of completing a goal or attempting to complete a goal, you'll move from quad 3 to quad 4, and you'll begin to demonstrate compassion for others who helped you along the way for achieving your goal, or even compassion for yourself in some of the struggles that you may have experienced if you fall short of a goal, but yet make progress along the way. And then finally, gratitude once you come to the completion of the execution of a goal, regardless of the outcome. And then the process starts again. And so that's Impactor Pathway. These are, again, research-based non-cognitive skills by Harvard University that are requisite for students to be successful in college and the workforce. And fortunately, these are the same skills that perfectly map onto every CTE pathway in California. And so you could draw your attention to the right of the wheel in the center, what we call the impactor cycle. If you look at education, child development, and family services, this idea that nurturing and and educating future generations demand the heart's compassion and gratitude. And so the more compassion and gratitude that you can develop at earlier phases and with precision, which is exactly what Impactor Pathway does, the more effective you'll be in that particular workforce sector, education, child development, and family services. The same is true for, if you go to the right of that, hospitality, tourism, and recreation. So this idea that enhanced customer experiences in hospitality and tourism arise from heartfelt gratitude and insightful perspective taking. So again, using these competencies in the impactor cycle to perfectly map onto each California pathway as part of the CTE initiative, and then become a more desirable or skilled laborer in the process, particularly in the new set of high-wage, high-competency jobs that are coming in the future. And so Impactor Pathway and those same attributes we've been talking about actually map onto these competencies, and we can again provide data back to schools and districts that is disaggregated by subgroup, which we'll get into in a moment. And so how do we do all this? If you go back to that demonstration video that we shared you could see students giving responses to self-reflection prompts in which they're asked to think about themselves and their experiences and their past and future experiences in relation to each one of those anchor attributes on the impactor cycle. And then what we do is we actually map those answers spoken by students in what's called a multidimensional vector space. So this is natural language processing technology. And then we evaluate those responses and then provide predictive analytics that can give a score in relation to a student's ability to demonstrate one of those anchor attribute competencies, either at home, at school, at their jobs, or in their community. And that's Impactor Pathway. Harvard's Making Caring Common project is actually the birthplace of this research. Harvard in 2019 wrote a research paper called The Definitions of Key Character, Non-Cognitive Terms, and Skills for Use in Ignition. And in this paper, Harvard identified in these 8 competencies: compassion, curiosity, gratitude, grit, growth mindset, perspective taking, purpose, and self-control, not just as ideas of skills that students might need, but actually as empirically proven competencies that lead to success in college and career. So this isn't just Harvard's idea based on a subset of data. This was really looking at the research across the field and determining, what exactly compassion is, how compassion relates to success in school and in the workforce, which ultimately led to what you see here, which is 140 plus colleges in 2019. Today, this number is above 400. So 400 colleges, as a result of Harvard's research, have changed their admissions policy to what's called a character-based admissions process. And so valuing and prioritizing service and ethical character above academics. And so there's lots of evidence for that. If you work in college and career or have been to your, college counseling center since the pandemic, students who used to get into a particular college or university are not the profile of students who get in anymore. And there's actually a reason for that. It has to do with Making Canon Commons efforts to really bolster character-based admissions and begin to give schools a framework for how to quantify, these competencies as a part of evaluating students, something that the workforce is doing as well. And so if you think about what the workforce is doing, and we'll talk more about impactor pathways alignment to Department of Labor, but this is the Department of Labor's current soft skills curriculum. So if you're in any federally funded school, think of Department of Defense schools or military schools across the world, actually, in which Department of Defense is funding that initiative, or workforce development program, Skills to Pay the Bills is the curriculum that's currently in place. And this is entirely a soft skills curriculum. So the argument that Department of Labor is making is that as the workforce is changing, skills like communication, which is not a hard skill, but a softer skill, a more non-cognitive skill. Somebody can be a wonderful communicator, but not as strong in math and science as another student, but stronger in communication because it requires a different cognitive part of the brain, a non-cognitive part of the brain based on experience. This is really what the federal government and Department of Labor is pushing, including actual communication activities and curricula to this point. And so with that, it's probably a good opportunity to get into how Impactor Pathway works and provide an actual live demonstration of the platform. And again, we're going to map natural language to a multidimensional vector space and provide analytics around that. And to demonstrate that, we have a cool little interface. So you're looking at Impactor Pathway. This is an app on Clever that's, a one-step single sign-in for students to begin to experience. A student would load up their app, immediately log in, and be taken to a self-reflection prompt that looks and feels exactly like this.
Now that you've considered how you react when someone else needs your comfort or support, let's think about how we also need to pick ourselves off the ground when we need it. Watch this runner do exactly that. That must have hurt. Physically and emotionally. But you saw this runner find the strength to recover and give that race his all. Have you ever faced a situation like that? Talk about a time you had to recover from an upset. How did you react when you failed, and what did you do to get back on track?
So students experience this, and then directly from a connected device, so no software needed, just a browser. Student can click audio or video. For these purposes, we'll go ahead and click audio. And immediately you're taken to what's called a waveform visualizer, where students can begin to understand, although we have a bunch of training documents, that we are going to be taking their spoken language answer to this particular prompt. You can actually use a teleprompter on the screen. And so you can take notes on this teleprompter. You can think about scaffolding for students of all levels, including English learners, students on IEPs and 504s, who may need some additional scaffolds or notes on the screen in order to speak a response. Totally fine. And then go ahead and press record. And as the technology is getting ready to record, there's quite a few things happening here. So not only is there speech to text technology that's going to convert everything that a student is saying into text, but there's also timestamp data. So part of what we're able to measure is depth and complexity. So how quickly students are able to get to DOTA 2, 3, and 4 levels of non-cognitive skill demonstration. And then we can translate that depth and complexity, that timestamp data, into some predictive analytics. And so that's fundamentally what the technology does. We're going to be able to map a response from student A in one particular vector space, a response from student B in another space, and then we can measure the distance between them and start to provide disaggregated analytics, which we'll demonstrate in a dashboard in a second. So you can click yes or no, and we'll go ahead and show you what that dashboard experience is looking like. But first, let's listen to what it is that students say. And so want to pay particular attention to this idea of authentic language. So you're going to hear a student response to the question that you just saw. And I think it's important to note her use of the phrase yellow caution tape. That's a very specific phrase that she's using that actually provides the natural language processing analytics with a specific piece of data that is very localized to her experience, to her background, her family background, her socioeconomic background, her community. And so take a listen to what authentic language responses sound like and what they're able to produce analytically from a data perspective as well.
When given some thought to this question, I realized that I don't have as much failures as I would have expected to have. And when given the question, what's your biggest failure? I think my answer would be not taking enough risks to experience true failure. I feel like I've always been so afraid of facing someone saying no or facing failures that I tend to kind of stay in my comfort zone and stand behind the yellow caution tape and not let myself explore the world or explore new challenges, new experiences because I'm afraid of someone saying no to me.
Really interesting answer. And so she goes on for a little bit longer to talk more about this idea of yellow caution tape and it not being a barrier in the same way that a wall is a barrier, but that it is a warning for her. And she knows she can cross it, but she's not yet ready to cross it in terms of taking risks and experiencing more failure. And it's a really interesting answer that, probably can't be generated by anyone other than her because of her language background and experiences and kind of what her current synaptic formation is in her brain. We're able to actually measure those neurological pathways to be able to predict, again, her ability to demonstrate a competency like growth mindset in the future. So how do we do this and where does all of this go? You're looking at a teacher view of the Impactor Pathway dashboard. This is actually a cohort of students, so a particular class of students that have experienced a program. And you're looking at a bunch of analytics that we provide for school districts. So not just completion percentages or competencies in particular areas, but we also provide something called an impactor potential score. So you would be able to quantify student growth in those 8 competencies like growth mindset, gratitude, and compassion over time to provide an analytic, for example, that says our 9th grader students increase their non-cognitive skills or their soft skills in relation to the 21st century workforce 15% year over year from 9th to 10th grade, something like that. You could also disaggregate that by competency strand. And so if you look at something like growth mindset or grit, you can understand that in this particular cohort of students, there is a higher starting point than there is in compassion and gratitude. And that may indicate that compassion and gratitude experiences, culture, and activity may not be as strong at the lower grade levels or at other parts of the school system. And you can investigate that, great PD around that. To the same extent, you can find a competency like perspective taking, which may have a higher starting point, or a competency like growth mindset, which may have a higher mid-level, and understand one of the best practices that are contributing to that to, again, be able to spread those non-palliative skills, because those are so hard and difficult and challenging to replicate. And so taking a look, again, just at this dashboard so you can understand how everything gets quantified. This is a role-based permission dashboard. So what you're seeing here is a teacher version, which is totally different than what students see. Here you can understand how students are doing by their particular competency in a particular area, like growth mindset. Again, all of these are scaled scores, which are provided by the natural language processing backend for school districts. Here you're looking at probably the most useful. By the way, all of this is exportable, so you can kind of export this to a CSV. This can import into your student information system. If you're using Aries or PowerSchool, this can end up being a field or a column in your SIS system. But if you take a look at all of these competencies across these students, you can see that they're mapped to impact or attributes. But you can also see that we can really quickly map them back to CASEL. And so if CASEL is the framework that you're using district-wide, you'll be able to get not only that soft skill component in regards to compassion, gratitude, grit, and growth mindset, but also quantifiable metrics in regards to responsible decision-making. So you can track a student over time in terms of how they're doing in their responsible decision-making and understand, the difference between student responses from a student like this versus a student like this, and what exactly the NLP is taking up on in regards to the demonstration and predictability of those same requisite soft skills that are required for the workforce. So that's a little bit of impactor pathway in a nutshell. That can kind of give you the nuts and bolts of the program, from self-reflection, natural language prompts, to the authentic student voice that's captured, and then the quantifiable analytics that are then provided back to a school district. And in this next section, what we'll do is we'll dig a little bit deeper so that we can understand, hearing voices of more students from more backgrounds, and also understanding the curricular and instructional piece, which is really turnkey and plug and play and designed for students to be able to do on their own and or for teachers to facilitate. And so think of this next section as a little bit deeper than the overview, and something that we're happy to talk with school districts and CTE leaders a little bit more about. And I think we'll start with this piece right here, which is a young lady who's answering a question about growth mindset.
Okay, I hope you guys can hear me, but I would say that an area in my life that I have improved on and want to continue to improve would be my mindset. Okay. When a few years ago, when I was in middle school, like 4 years ago, I was in 8th grade. And my mindset was very, if I don't do it like this, then I'm going to be this, and I'm going to be a failure, and I'm not going to be able to succeed, right? But I feel like now that I'm older and I've grown into myself more, and
she goes on to actually demonstrate quite a mature growth mindset for any student. And one of the reasons we really like this answer has to do with a number of things. So first of all, this young lady is on a school-issued device after school. It's around 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She is at her boyfriend's football practice, sitting in the bleachers, doing non-cognitive SEL soft skill practice. And we find that to be quite remarkable and amazing and wonderful that she can do this 24 hours a day in adaptable learning spaces on her own. And as you can see, she's actually practicing the competency of growth mindset by providing some language to it. So for those of you that are using ruler programs or Mark Brackett's work, this idea of how language creates precision around the execution of social emotional learning targets is really, really important. And so by giving herself more language and more practice, she's almost going to the soft skill gym and working out the soft skill muscle in a way that's, engaging for her and meaningful for her, particularly over time. Another thing about this example that's particularly relevant and what we think is important is that if you notice, she's not using words with more than 1 or 2 syllables very frequently. So most of her vocabulary is 1 or 2 syllables. That probably speaks to some of the academic experiences she may be experiencing in her community. This is a student from a high school in South Los Angeles. And the high school reports that prior to Impact Her Pathway, they actually didn't know that much about her. Not that she was falling through the cracks, but she wasn't a student that was on everybody's radar for one reason or another. But through Impact Her Pathway, kind of uncovering some of her maturity, uncovering some of her soft skill development and ability to demonstrate this in local language for her peers and for her school community, she ended up being identified for Gates Millennium Scholarship, which she since won. She's at UCLA right now, and she and the school really credit Impact Her Pathway not for developing her competencies, because they seem to have been developed largely before she got to Impact Her Pathway, but for validating her competencies and identifying the soft skill growth so that the school can end up having a local example for other students who may not have this language precision to be able to understand what soft skill development and maturity looks like in their local context. And so just a little bit of a deeper dive into what Impact Her Pathway can do and uncover. And to talk more about how that's possible, what you're looking at here is a course player. So all of these experiences, that assessment, that spoken language assessment experience that you saw earlier, all come from this course player. So Impact Her Pathway provides 6 coursified experiences, 500 activities, hundreds of lessons that actually help students and equip them with the language, background, and framework to be able to respond to these self-reflection prompts about competencies like curiosity and gratitude and purpose. And so inside of here, as a quick demonstration, wanted to show you what this unit looks like. We call it Ikigai for Impact. And if you're not familiar with the concept of Ikigai, I'll go ahead and play you an actual experience from the curriculum itself.
There's an ancient Japanese concept called Ikigai, which is the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for.
So really quickly, you'll notice that short form video content is the basis for all of the learning experiences inside of Impactor. So we're going to serve students short form videos, create some language experiences in around those videos, use heavy visuals like what you see here to actually demonstrate a definition like Ikigai so that we can draw natural language out of students a little bit later in the process. So the first step is equipping students with the idea or framework or language in and around a particular competency. So this competency here is purpose. We start with Ikigai, the idea of finding what you love, what you're good at, and what you can be paid for, which is a workforce competency. And then provide some written language experiences. So think of an adult in your life that seems to have found their Ikigai. Students write and respond to that. Natural language processing evaluates that response as well. Give an actual historical example of the Wright brothers and talk about why they were the people that ended up discovering flight versus the Smithsonian folks. I think Langley was the one who was paid for it, but the Wright brothers are the ones who actually got to the answer. And then obviously relate everything back to impact, right? This idea that finding your Ikigai and knowing what you're good at, knowing what you love, and knowing what you can make a living off of is exactly what purpose is. And that's a way to be more precise about thinking about that answer. What do you want to be when you grow up? Which becomes a different kind of answer once you get into middle school, high school, and beyond. And so this is a little bit about how the curricular or learning experience works. We're proud of the novelty, and students are really responding well to it. We have demonstrations of, very specific kinds of students and interests. We're trying to really represent everybody. This is Booga. For those of you that are gamers, 2019, Booga becomes the first gamer to win the World Cup of Fortnite, $1 million prize. But what's more important about that is that Booga's trying to find his Ikigai, right? And so we talk about turning passion into impact. If you're familiar with the hashtag trash taggers, this is a young lady who is actually committed from a purpose standpoint into making an impact on the environment, and how can she turn that into an actual job and a career. And so we have video content in and around that. But I think, one of the things that's really important is, how we tie everything together. And so if you haven't seen this before, this is an actual Ikigai campaign from General Motors. I'll play you a quick clip so you can understand how we round everything out for students.
We're all born with the good in us. We're all in need of love. Dreams get torn, but we stand up, making a change that is calling us. Beautiful world, beautiful people, boys and girls, we're all made equal. So clap your...
So really focusing on not only finding one's purpose in relation to work and employment, but similarly, this idea that your work and employment don't necessarily need to define you. You can work for the purposes of being a swim instructor or a martial arts dad or a wonderful mom and cook and chef for your family, leader in the home. These are all in relation to what Ikigai means. And then finally, creating a more rigorous self-reflection prompt. Like, how do you think the 4 elements of Ikigai apply to your purpose at this point? And then finally rounding it out to that self-reflection that we demonstrated earlier, where our course facilitator actually asks you a specific question about your purpose, and then you demonstrate through spoken language your response. I'll play you this prompt really quickly, and we can listen to what a couple students say from a CTE standpoint in relation to their purpose development and goal formation.
Finish the sentence, impactors. Having a purpose is so blank. What did you fill in the blank with? Important? Difficult? Scary? Rewarding? Whatever you finish the sentence with is probably true. Having a purpose is lots of things. But as the residents of Okinawa show us, it's a necessary component to living a rich and full life.
So students, again, press video or audio. They're required to listen to the entire prompt, so they can't just skip around. Audio and video unshade themselves once the facilitator is done prompting. And students begin to give answers that are going to look and sound a lot like what we hear inside of our CTE courses, particularly for some of our younger students who are developing purpose or thinking about purpose more explicitly, if not for the first time, for part of the beginning of their lives. And so I'll play you a couple of answers so you can understand how the machine learning picks up on what students are actually communicating and then evaluates them according to a rubric to provide a scaled score. Here's a student talking about their purpose or their purpose development.
Right now, I think my purpose will be to be a chef or someone who cooks food. My purpose has changed over time. I used to want to be an astronaut because I wanted to see space and I thought zero gravity was cool. One of the things I've dedicated time to is cooking.
Student goes on to really talk about the relationship between what they've spent time working on and how their goals have changed as a result. So there's a lesson inside of Impactor about the 10,000 hours rule, this idea of skilling up and getting better at a particular competency, leading you to be more successful at making a contribution to the workforce and to the community in which you live. And so we love this response. It shows a snapshot of a particular student's development at a particular moment in time. And then because of the data, you can disaggregate this to understand how this 9th or 10th grader is doing in relation to other 9th and 10th graders in your community, other 9th and 10th graders in the state, other 9th and 10th graders across the country, and even as local as a particular period of the day. Right? You could find out how purpose development is belling in, 4th period media arts class compared to 6th period culinary arts class. So that's part of what the analytics provide. I'll play you one more student response before we dig into on how are these actually evaluated and scored.
So first off, this is actually a great question because I'm actually developing that question for my essays for college. So in these essays, and what I truly think my purpose is to create large, meaningful impact on the world through becoming a tech entrepreneur. I want to be on the same level as Bezos or Musk or Zuckerberg without being as insane.
Student, actually interesting, a choice of language. This is part of what's great about open-ended responses, is that students can really say what their brains have developed them to be able to say, unstructured. So that's part of why we like those open-ended responses. It's part of what the natural language processing is evaluating. What direction, if you remember that idea of a multi-dimensional vector space, what direction are students taking their answers? And is that direction something that gets valued through a rubricized evaluation? And so really want to talk about a little bit about, what is the how on how all of this works. So if you take a student response in relation to a skill like purpose, and you can see that this is a natural machine learning rubric that's evaluating responses. So if you look at something like a score that would get at the 6th hand is display strong comprehension of personal purpose, demonstrates goal setting and pursuit with detailed planning and some depth of thought, versus something like exemplary, which would be displays a very nuanced and complex understanding of personal purpose, sets and pursues goals that reflect a deep reflective understanding of personal aspirations. This is how things are evaluated. And in relation to providing scoring metrics back to school districts, one of the things that's really important to understand is that all of these scaled scores are actually scored not only by a natural language processing rubric, but 20% of all responses weekly are pulled out and hand scored by a credentialed counselor, which we call a human in the loop efficacy model. And so we're constantly calibrating our evaluation to be as accurate as possible. And what we found is that we have a 97% adjacent accuracy score, which we're really, really proud of. And so what that means is that if you were to take any 2 counselors or 2 teachers in a particular setting, credentialed workers in the school or district, and you were to play them that young man's response that we just heard, they would score it within 1 standard deviation of each other 76% of the time. And our natural language processing backend is able to score it within 1 standard deviation of credential counselor or teacher 97% of the time. And so the idea is that you're getting reliable and predictive analytics that are actually valuable and that you can make some decisions on and then report back to the state when we think about that disaggregated data piece, right? To be able to say, hey, 9th graders have developed their curiosity 12% year over year and 33% over the course of our CTE program. Wanted to show you an additional view. So you're looking at a particular student view here. All students are going to get an impact potential score. And so this is a student score in relation to these competency levels. These scores grow over time in our coursified format, and in our assessment format, they're more of an objective one-time view. So the student is beginning their course and their score will likely grow over time. This is their radio competency. And inside, we archive all student answers. And so a student can go back and actually read their spoken word response or listen to their audio or video response and also get specific feedback. And so our NLP backend actually can make college and major recommendations. So here, in response to the student's answer, they're getting feedback that says the perseverance and resilience you've displayed will serve you well in college and the workforce. At Harvard University, for example, determination is crucial in navigating challenging coursework and achieving academic success, setting the stage for a rewarding career post-graduation. The student can click Explore Impact, go to the Harvard website, get a major recommendation based on their soft skill competencies to, again, start to create that link between what it is we're doing in high school and what it is that we're aspiring to do in college and career. These are some of the pre-course and post-course assessments that's in the stake. So you can see growth in this particular competency around core of more awareness. So that's self and social awareness straight from the CASTLE framework. And this is impact or pathway in a nutshell. So to be able to create these visualizations for not just students, but for all stakeholders in the community, including family members, including teachers and administrators, but also including the workforce. And what you're looking at here is an actual application, a CCTKey application that our Park Visit San Diego are using. So this is powered by Impactor Pathway. And so what you're looking at here is a graduating senior. And in this particular visualization, the district is using Impactor Pathway self-reflection prompts to create this web page. This is actually a shareable URL. So this is a real data that the student owns. And the student can actually put this link up on their LinkedIn profile, for example. They can include this URL in their resume. They can send this to college admissions officers. And what's going to happen here, they're going to get some academic analytics around the student, get a career focus, get these anchor attributes from Impactor Pathway to know where their competencies are strongest and where they're still developing, get persistence and tenacity goals and impact endorsement in narrative form. But most importantly,
I think that
begin to actually demonstrate their soft skill competencies from the inside out. So this young lady, for example, I believe she applied to a Starbucks or a Jamba Juice. And as part of her application, she sent this shareable URL that she got from her CTE pathway program and Impactor Pathway. And she was able to say, hey, I've already thought about my purpose. Let me show you the question that I answered and what my response was and what my scores and analytics are. Let me show you how I've overcome obstacles and demonstrated grit. Let me talk about my milestones that I've achieved, which is relation, again, to growth mindset and perseverance over a long period of time. And then let me talk about my compassion and my gratitude and my relationship with mentors and my perspective as a mentee. And so in being able to provide this not only to the student, but in a real world application where this young man can actually send these videos, these quantifiable responses and these metrics out to a prospective college or employer so they can get to know him better and actually value his soft skills before he starts working at that job or going to that school. That's really what Impactor Pathway is all about. And so obviously this is, what's provided to all school districts through Impactor Pathway. So not only that coursified curriculum, not only those pieces of disaggregated data, not only those qualitative narratives that students are using in authentic voice, but actual tangible visualizations and competencies and data that students own in real life that they can then share to actually achieve their CTE pathway and go to state pathway program goals. And so again, that's kind of what Impactor Pathway does in relation to fulfilling GSPP requirements and data reporting now that school districts are beginning to put their plans in action. I think just for this last piece, what we can talk about or share are some of the outcomes as a result of what's possible with Impactor Pathway. Didn't talk too much about this, but all of Impactor Pathway prompts are available in multiple languages. And so this is a Spanish language version. Also, students can respond to prompts in all languages, home or target language. It won't affect their evaluation scores. If you have time and are interested in reading some of the research in and behind Impactor Pathway, this is just part of what NLP technology does in terms of classification and regression. There are some visualizations here in regards to how student responses are cleaned and then processed, and then finally some NLP examples about syntactical formation and semantic meaning in and around mapping language to a multidimensional vector space. And then for those who are interested in learning more about scoring and providing actual analytics back to students, can learn more about that also in our research and our white papers. So as a last piece for implementation and outcomes in regards to Impactor Pathway, we talk a little bit about how courses or rather how content is coursified. So you're looking at a course sequence called Foundations for Leadership. All courses are a semester long. So there's 6 courses, 3 years worth of curricular and assessment experiences that can be done in 15 or 20 minute increments weekly throughout a 20-week semester. And obviously all of this is adaptable to block scheduling or whatever kind of bell scheduling that you may have in your environment. Also, teacher handbooks are available, and obviously professional development in and around how to execute this. We have suggested time parameters, proactivity. Everything's designed to be short and bite-sized, as you saw earlier in that course player experience. And when we get to the actual units, you can see content on the right and actual instructions for teachers on the left. But this can also be done completely asynchronously. So we have tons of applications in which students are assigned this work and then given a series of accountability benchmarks or completion or extra credit or credit for completing tasks along the way. It doesn't necessarily need to be taught whole group, but it can be, just depending on your implementation. And so not sure of the various or particular CTE implementation methodology you may be thinking of, but you can think of, we have whole school implementations that are done through advisory. We have CTE specific applications that are done by CTE programs inside CTE courses once or twice a week. There are teachers that actually share student responses to be able to develop competencies across student groups and then talk about some about interview skills or letter of recommendation, skills that Impactor Pathways teaching and how to embed competencies like gratitude in an apt like asking for a letter of recommendation. So again, all of these are demonstrated in and throughout the curriculum, which can be done synchronously, asynchronously, or in hybrid form. And in focusing on outcomes, again, talking about the metrics in and around your CTE programming, the integrated data that you're going to need to provide disaggregated for CTE students. Impactor Pathway is obviously aligned to all 7 California dashboard goals. So you're looking at purpose, which is directly related to attendance, as a clear sense of purpose increases student motivation and commitment, or the relationship between grit and graduation rate. So you would basically be able to disaggregate your CTE students' graduation rate compared to your general population in your school district or particular school site. And furthermore, you'd be able to make the correlation between grit development, because you're going to have grit competency scores. And what you'll find is that students with the highest levels of grit also have the highest levels of success in terms of graduation rate, or students with the highest levels of compassion are actually the ones who are most engaged and participating to healthy climate measures of metrics across your campus, or those with the highest curiosity are usually those with the highest GPAs across your campus. And so being able to not only get this correlative data in relation to California dashboard outcomes, but to be able to then link that data back to a soft skill competency, that's exactly what the state of California is looking for in regards to meeting program requirements for integrated SEL support throughout CTE. Here's a PBIS application. So this is a school that's actually having an Impactor Awards Assembly. They have a program called Impactor of the Month, in which they recognize students for each one of these soft skill competencies. Go ahead and play this for a second.
While expressing my sincere gratitude for the positive impact that Impactor Pathway has made in our lives. This program has increased our leadership and overall critical thinking skills inside and outside of the classroom.
So the school district, or actually ASB, those are ASB students, so actually go ahead and take nominations from teachers to recognize students who are demonstrating these soft skills. And then those students talk about their experiences and how they use that particular soft skill competency either at their jobs or in their CTE courses or at home or in their community. Here's another application. So this is Impactor Pathway, the Impactor Ambassadors Program. So this is actually a school club handbook. So you can actually use your competencies and actually start to create action on your community. So you can imagine the idea of demonstrating perspective taking actually at your school. So organize a walk in my shoes day where students experience different social or physical challenges, host a cultural exchange. If you want to develop purpose, you can launch a Find Your Why video contest. So these are actually bringing these soft skills to others and executing on them in real life, which is another application of the program. And here is our friends in Zista Unified, who, if you're doing any portrait of a graduate work and the relation of whole child learning or whole child goals, CPE goals in relation to district-wide outcomes, this district has identified kind and confident, curious and connected, capable and knowledgeable as portrait of a graduate competencies that they value. And then impactor pathway has gone ahead and crosswalked those competencies back to the impactor anchor attributes, as you can see here. So kind and confident in relation to kindness and respect, which relates to gratitude and compassion on the impactor scale, and then developing a custom assessment to actually draw those spoken language answers out of students and then provide visualizations back to learners in relation to those kind and confident competencies, curious and connected, capable and knowledgeable. These are all, again, portrait of a graduate goals, which are the beginning pieces and the end pieces of the CTE pathway work that obviously expands above and beyond high school coursework. And so students are able to get these scoring metrics, which are quantified for teachers, but visualized in performance bands for students, similar to the California dashboard. And then obviously you can kind of click through, students can download, this is shareable with parents. And now the community becomes not only accountable, but aware of the district-wide commitment to these goals and the fact that they're measurable and being tracked over time. One last application is a soft skills program for restorative learning. So these are our friends at Health Sciences High School in San Diego. Again, similarly, they created a custom assessment and then developed this competency crosswalk for the skills that are important to them, and then are able to relate all these competencies back for students, in particular pathways. So for mental and behavioral health pathway, this is the restorative scholar profile. And again, all of these responses are video responses that can be heard and listened to and then quantified. And then here, the quantification has to do with the following steps: striving, investing, participating, withdrawing, avoiding, and disrupting. So this student is towards the higher end of their competency journey in terms of being investing in the restorative scholar profile, in particular to her mental and behavioral health pathway. So again, that's impactor pathway in a nutshell. Lots to think about and to continue to consider as you're executing your Golden State Pathways program goals through funding, and as you think about supporting the continued development of a skilled and educated workforce, and you think about the work plan that you created at the beginning of this process in relation to expected outcome 4, integrated support services for CTE students that addresses the pupil's social, emotional, and academic needs, including underrepresented student populations that you'll need to report back to your county office of ed or a CDE liaison in relation to how you're doing and how you're dwelling those competencies quantitatively as part of the California State Plan. We hope that you'll consider impactor pathway or other solutions to help give you the empirical science, the data and the background you need to validate your efforts, keep you compliant with Golden State Pathways, education code and law and accountability, and obviously do really, really wonderful things for our students as we prepare them for the 21st century workforce of the highly skilled, high-wage jobs of the future. So thank you very much and appreciate you joining this webinar.